All set.
Okay, okay. So, bulletproofing transactions. So this is actually this is a chapter in Gary Keller's shift book that was written back in 2006, 2007. There are 12 sections or chapters. Bulletproofing transactions is the last one. I teach this all routinely because it's still totally relevant to our current world. And as you'll notice on the far right-hand column, I've added several issues that are concerning issues that sort of fall into the category of those big issues that can kill deals. And we have another one too. So you can write in number 10, which is solar panels. Mm-hmm. So we have 10 to talk about. And the material you have here from that chapter in the shift book, Bulletproofing Transactions, is that you have a bunch of material here. It's for you to read. There are suggestions about scripting conversations and whatnot, but we're going to be with a very small exception. We're going to be focusing our entire attention on this one page, and we're going to be just talking about it. I will bring to your attention just before we go to the chart. The reality of the bulletproofing transactions is if a deal falls apart, everybody loses, and presumably everybody starts all over. Unless you've got a situation where the deal falls apart because the buyer can't get their financing, only to find out that they can't start all over because they're not going to get their financing. But by and large, it's usually a heartbreak for everybody involved: agents, buyers, sellers. Painful. So we try to keep these things together as much as we possibly can, and also understanding that we can't control all things, right? And deals are going to fall apart. But if I suggest to you that our canceled deals, once they're fully executed, that never reach the closing table, it probably averages about 30% of the transactions that are executed. And we are much, much better than the industry average, which might be closer to 50%. So if you think about that, right? So we work so hard to put these things together to get right. And some of you, in today's market, you may be working with particular buyers, and you might have to write 5, 6, 7, 10 offers before they get one accepted. That's a lot of work. And then,
John, I have a meeting this morning, actually, right after this class. I have a meeting with it's a listing appointment. And his number one question this morning when I called him was, tell me what you think about solar panels. And so when you said that, I was like, no, he didn't just say that. This is perfect.
Does our potential listing client have solar panels?
No, he actually has a home. It's an old Victorian home in Willimantic. It was built in 1819. And he's curious as to just my opinion. It was the topic of conversation. I'm sure it will be the topic of our lunch appointment today. So
all right. Well,
yeah.
we'll segue into talking about solar panels first, just in case you have to leave early.
Yeah, thanks.
However, let's review these major issues to contract to close. Number one in the far left column, we've got inspections and repairs. So we know that people, have home inspections. Home inspections can reveal bad things, and sometimes buyers and sellers can't negotiate successfully whatever comes up during the inspection period. So deals might fall apart because of inspections. Deals will fall apart occasionally because of low bank appraisals. Deals will fall apart because not of the appraisal necessarily, but because our buyer clients out there, when they started their mortgage application, they looked like they were qualified, but going through the full application and mortgage process, come to find out they're not qualified for whatever reason. There's a lot of reasons why people would get denied. And sometimes it could be just totally a bad loan officer and a bad mortgage company. That falls into that category. And we have other contingencies, number 4. So in the second column, we can identify what are some of these other contingencies. And so if you have a sale, your buyer's house is contingent upon them selling a house to buy the next house. That's always iffy. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And then we have third-party approvals. That could be these third-party companies, relocation companies like a Cardis, which is one of the biggest, probably the biggest, where they take over control of an employee's selling of a house because the employer for that employee who's moving them to some new location wants that employer to be engaged fully with their work and not have to worry about the whole stress of selling a house. So they hire a third-party company to handle the real estate transaction. And so they'll typically, it's whoever the account executive is not going to be somebody here that's living at the house. They're going to be in some other state. And so you have more eyes and ears and noses in the confusion of selling. So they can be a little bit tricky. And we have some estate sales, short sales, foreclosure sales, which is a reload sale. I'd say out of that group, probably the most confusing at times can be the short sale, knowing whether you're ever going to get that thing to a closing. But there's, anyway, they fall into the last thing here is a clouded title, which in the state of Connecticut, the way that we're an attorney closing state, and the attorneys typically wait till the last minute to do a title search. Because they don't want to spend the time, money, or resources to do a title search until they're absolutely convinced the property is going to close. So several days or so before the closing, they'll go and do a title search. And lo and behold, find out there's a glitch, which is going to hold up the closing. It might kill the closing, depending on the nature of whatever comes up that's just not properly aligned with the title. And then we have number 5, co-op agent. So yes, whoever you're working with on the other side of the transaction sometimes will be your biggest obstacle. It happens, like we got good agents, we got bad agents, we got good and bad in every profession. And quite frankly, you can't say everybody in the real estate industry is, working on all cylinders all the time. So sometimes we have to deal with that. And then the last one here, number 6, is deadlines. And we need to be paying attention, if we're on top of our game, to all the various timeline issues, deadline issues that are part of every contract. First deposits, second deposits, home inspections, mortgage contingency dates, closing dates, all these dates that are meaningful. So we're going to talk about that too. And then we have buyer's remorse as number 7, which actually in your packet of information is the first one talked about. Then we have 8 permits, and permits, I would say, over the last 10, 15 years has become a bigger and bigger issue. Lack of permits is a better way of saying it. And then flood. So properties that are in flood zones and people are unaware of, whether the seller might be unaware of it, the buyer writes an offer, they're unaware of it, and all of a sudden they're in the mortgage process, application is already paid for, and they're well on their way, and come to find out, it's in a floodplain and might cost you $3,000 a year for flood insurance. Oh, wait a minute, that's going to add several $100s to my monthly payments, and I can't afford to do that. And so deals might fall apart because of that. And then we go to number 10, solar panels. So my thought, solar panels can be good. And they can be leased systems, owned systems, or what's called power purchase agreements, which is sort of a leased system as well. Most of what comes across to us are leased systems. And the several major solar panel companies, Sonova being one of them. So you sign like a 20-year lease, 25-year lease. The document agreement is probably 30 pages. There's costs associated. Yes, there can be savings, presumably, for people that install solar panels over time. But in the idea with the lease system, if you have a house with solar panels and you go to sell your house and you have a lease system, you need to find a buyer that wants to buy into solar. That's simple. That, I mean, the cost of removing panels and breaking a lease might be $20,000. You know, it would depend on how far into the lease you are.
And so we could comfortably say to a seller that, um, yeah, like it's just you're narrowing your market as
Yeah,
far as buyers.
yeah.
Wow.
I like to compare it like to in-ground swimming pools. You know, some people really like in-ground swimming pools and they really want a house that has an in-ground swimming pool. And then there's a wide group of the buyer pool that really isn't interested in having that pool and maintaining it. So for some, it's great, for others, not so much. And I think the liabilities with the solar panels, I mean, if I'm selling a house, right, and I don't have solar panels, I'm not going to go put solar panels on my house so that it enhances the sale of my property. That would be, in my opinion, foolish. The other thing with the solar panels, so you're selling your house, you've got a lease system. Let's say you still got 18 years left on your lease. It's going to be very, very costly for you to sell your property to somebody that doesn't want to transfer that, take the transfer of that lease into their own name. But that buyer has to file an application to do so. The seller has to immediately, once they go to put their house on the market, notify the solar company that they're doing so. The buyer, when the buyer comes along, has to be willing to make an application to accept the transfer of that lease to them. So there's going to be a perusal time, for instance, for them to go over the documents, make sure that it's what they want and that they're willing to go forward. And assuming they are, and they make the application with the solar panel company, they could very well get refused based on their credit score. So you might have a buyer that has enough credit that would qualify for a loan, but it's not going to qualify as far as the solar company is concerned. So you have that potential issue as well.
Yeah, and I have a question about that because I know I'm gonna have buyers say, "Well, you know, I just applied for a new mortgage, you know, I'm a new home buyer and I just pulled my credit. And so I don't wanna have to pull my credit again for a lease on solar panels." You know?
So I don't know if it's, I don't know if, I don't know if there's any impact
Yeah.
on that.
That's what I feel too, but I know that the new buyers, these young couples, they're saying these things and I have to reassure them, you know, and I just not sure what to do.
Well, yeah, I probably calling a lender or maybe calling even one of the solar panel companies themselves, just asking them.
Is it a soft check or is it a
Yes,
hard check?
yeah. My guess is it would be soft,
Yeah.
but yeah, the question's probably gonna come up later, yeah. Yeah. So I mean, the solar panel thing could be fine, but it also can be messy. And I mean, we had one, just to share with you, we had one. A buyer ended up, we are on both sides of the transaction. Two different agents. But the buyer ended up getting to the closing table without accepting the transfer of the lease. Never went through with the transfer of the lease. Now, the closing attorneys were notified and they still closed on the property. And then after the fact, my sense of that is the seller's attorney, and the seller had the solar panels and the seller was a flipper. So he bought the house with the solar panels, that attorney represented him, so she knew all about the solar panel stuff and the importance and so forth. This buyer comes along, buys the house, and it was a quick closing. It was like, really quite, you know, it was like within 3 weeks to 30 days that she was doing conventional financing, and everything went boom, boom, boom. But she never accepted the notion that she wanted to accept the transfer and apply for the transfer. The closing attorneys are notified, they somehow closed it anyway. The only thing I can think of is the closing attorney was under the impression, well, she's taking care of it. It's just because of the quick closing, she hasn't completed the process yet. Well, shame on her. But nonetheless, I mean, you know, the client who sold the property is still getting billed for the solar panels. Apparently, she not only did not accept the solar panels, but she had them removed when she closed on the house. So it's a mess, total mess. And of course, you know, they're trying to blame us, and the seller's attorney was. Now, anyway, it's a mess. Just be aware, solar panels can be.
John, I'm sorry, you said there are 3 systems, leased, owned, and what was the other
It's a
one?
purchase power agreement, PPA. Which is, it's like leased through a different. It's just like a Sonova. It's another company through Sonova, like for instance, I don't know, it's I guess for all intents and purposes, it really is kind of, it's just a different kind of a lease system. But I said, most of them that I come across are leased systems. And there is a solar panel rider that should accompany every offer, and identifying what it is, if there are in fact solar panels, and there should be like a 5-day period for the buyer to review the lease agreement to see if they want to move forward before they accept, you know. But people are not aware enough often with these things, and they can be complicated.
Right.
And so.
And should it be part of the disclosure documents as well? The solar?
Yeah. So beware of solar. Make sure if you have a buyer, make sure your buyer wants to accept that lease. Make sure your buyer has good credit. Now, my understanding is, I don't know if every solar panel company is exactly the same, but I think that good credit for being able to get that lease transferred to you would be they have to be in the 675 range. And you can get a mortgage at 640. So does that give you enough fuel for conversation? All right.
It sure does. Thank you.
Okie dokie. So we'll go right up to number 9, flood. We're starting to talk about a little bit. I mean, flood's fairly easy. You just have to pay attention. I mean, FEMA the flood maps have been changing pretty often over the course of years. And so you might have somebody that's been living in a house for a long while. They've never had water in their basement. They've never even thought about flood insurance. But if you check their property online, you find out that at some point in time, it became part of a flood zone. And if it's part of a flood zone, it's going to require insurance, flood insurance. And depending on what kind of zone, 100-year, 500-year, whatever the particular category is, would determine the cost associated with insurance. So if you're listing a property, you should always check to make sure that your property is not in a flood zone. And I say every property, even if it's at the top of a hill, just get in the habit of always doing that. And if you're representing a buyer, same thing. They are now interested in moving forward with an offer on a property. Check the flood status of that property. You know, if you deal with these things up front, yes, no, or maybe, you know, come to find out, oh, that's in flood zone. What's that going to mean? What would the cost be to my buyer? We research that, talk to the lender, and get an answer. And then the buyer makes a determination as they want to move forward, rather than you start the whole process. You spend money, do the mortgage application, couple weeks go by and all of a sudden now you're dealing with the issue and the deal falls apart. So you can keep these transactions from falling apart if you never started them to begin with, right? Make sense? Yeah, and there are times where you can actually, a property, which gets a little confusing and it's a little time consuming as well. Properties might be listed in like, that's really marginal, but it looks like it's possibly in the flood zone. And they've never had a water problem. You can actually hire somebody, buyer or seller. Somebody could hire an engineer to go out and determine whether or not it is a flood consideration, and they can be exempted from flood insurance. It costs some money to do that and some time, so you'd have to have a buyer and a seller who are willing to work with each other to, you know, exhaust that to find out for sure. But anyway, always check flood. 8 permits. This is another one where there are a lot of things that require permits. You put new roofs on, you put new windows in, you remodel your kitchen, you change the plumbing, electrical, you put on a deck or an addition. All these are permittable things.
I have a question about that, John. So I have another, it was a lead that didn't go through right now, but in the potential future. And
Mhm.
so I talked to the owners and they said, "Oh yeah, we have this house we bought in the 90s, blah blah blah, but we have a barn that we put up during COVID without a permit. What does that look like?" So, how do I answer those questions? Because I'm so new in this career, you
Yeah.
know, if you don't pull a permit, it's okay, but you don't get the value of it? How does that work?
Well, no, here's where the permits get uh, most interesting. If you have a buyer that is financing, in other words, they're getting a mortgage, there's always going to be an appraisal. And it is more likely than not that an appraiser is going to identify whether or not remodeled work or finished work or additions have been properly permitted. And if they haven't, they're going to notify the lender. And the lender is going to say to the buyer, "Hey buyer, we need an open and closed permit," let's say in this case on the barn, "before we're going to loan you the money." Because the lender's standpoint is we want, if work has been done and we're insuring it, and maybe in some cases we're the ones holding 80% or 90% of the risk, right? Then we want to make sure that everything was done properly. And you can't blame the lenders, right? And there was a time not so long ago where the lenders really weren't, they weren't really paying that kind of a strict attention. Wasn't like the permits weren't required, but you'd have a lot of deals that would go through and there wouldn't be any attention brought to it. When we had the crash, 2008, 2009, a lot of bad loans and foreclosures and all that. That's when things really started picking up in terms of the scrutiny on permits. And so that's quite a few years ago at this point. And I can't tell you every time, not every, it's still, there's no 100% guarantee that every appraiser is going to go out and identify every item that should be permitted. That wasn't. It's most common now that they will. Now I would be totally surprised if the barn wasn't identified as an unpermitted structure. So in this case of a listing presentation, I think the appropriate conversation for us to have, if we identify renovation, remodels, things that we would identify as needing permits, we just have that conversation with our client. Hey, notice the windows, because you're going to walk through the house, you're going to take notes, you're going to talk about this, that, and the other thing, and you see a newer kitchen. Well, when was the kitchen done? Oh, it was done did you guys do all the necessary permits? Yes, no, or maybe, open, close permits, yes, no, maybe. And I think anything like that where you know there's gonna be a potential issue because there wasn't permitted. And I mean, my best business practice conversation as your realtor would be to suggest we get this stuff taken care of now before we go live on the market. That's my best case or my best advice to you. But I have the seller that says, I really don't want to spend the money. I don't want to have to deal with it right now. And we said, well, we can see what happens. And I'm not going to walk away from the listing. Let's put it that way. But I'm going to clearly have the conversation of what I think is the best practice for them, which is to get this stuff wrapped up and cleaned up before we go live, so it doesn't become an issue. But if the seller says to me, well, okay, thank you for the advice, John. All right, but I'm not, I don't want to deal with it right now. Say, okay, but it might very well become an issue down the road. So we need to be prepared for that. And fact is, if it does become an issue down the road, then chances are the seller is going to do what they need to do. Because you know what, we've already had the conversation, I've set the expectation, I've given him the advice, and he's not gonna get blindsided. Because what you don't want is the party gets blindsided, you were 3-4 weeks into the transaction, appraisal goes out, report comes back, no permits, and then like everybody's dealing with timelines and people get all wigged out and stressed out, right? And then deals fall apart. Buyer wants to make sure that the permits all those necessary permits are opened and closed properly, and seller is saying, no way, Jose, and so from a listing side, I think having the conversation, giving them the advice to take care of this, but don't walk away from the listing. Don't make it I'm gonna argue to death with you and we're going to go do battle and get, we're gonna have a duel, get your musket out. Now, if you're on the buyer side and you're looking at this lovely house with all this nice remodeled stuff, or the new barn, and you go, well, the town doesn't have any information about this barn. It's a nice barn. Well, so we investigate, find out whatever there aren't permits open and closed, and we should be looking at this before we put our offer in. We've identified things that would require permits, at least to the best of our knowledge. We could write our offer contingent upon these unpermitted items being open permit and closed permit, and make it part of the contingency of our offer. And then you're going to get a response from the seller that's going to say, yes, I will, or no, I won't. And if the seller says, no, I won't, and that's the buyer's opportunity to perhaps, let's go find another house, without getting into an actual agreement executed and 3 or 4 weeks later, 5 weeks later, dealing with the issue that we could have dealt with up front. Does that make sense? Because people, and I will tell you though, I can think of one in Avon just in the last year or two. It was a little cape, and the guy who owns it did a lot of work. I mean, really made it nice. He didn't permit anything. And somehow or another, our buyer was able to get financing. I don't know exactly how that happened, but so what I'm telling you isn't 100%.
So I'm a little confused.
No, Rachel.
What else is new?
Well, you said it, I didn't know. What else?
Every day. So what if you want to remodel your kitchen and you hire somebody to do it? Do they get the permit?
All right, yeah, good question.
Ah,
Good question.
ding.
So here it is. The responsibility is the homeowners. So if you have a contractor that you hire and they're a licensed contractor, great. That contractor should absolutely know that they need to do the permit thing. And if you're the homeowner and you hire the contractor and they don't bring it to your attention, then it is still your responsibility to make sure that there's an open permit for whatever that work is. And I mean, this stuff happens. I mean, you get, we're so used to people doing remodeling and you've got family members or good friends and you barter, he's a contractor and he's gonna do it but nobody's paying attention to that little detail. Just makes it so much easier if you just do what you're supposed to do. And it's not like the permits they're not extraordinarily expensive. It's a process. But yes, it's the homeowner's responsibility, even if the contractor goes and does the work and does it properly, gives the homeowner a bill and the homeowner pays the bill, but nobody ever takes the permit.
And then what is a definition of a permit? So say you have a kitchen and you replace the cabinets and you replace the countertops and everything, but you're not adding on and it's not.
If you're gonna tackle anything with plumbing
Okay.
or electrical, it's gonna require permits. Like house I used to own, I remodeled it in the sense that I put a new sink in and I put a new countertop on and I refaced all the cabinets, but I didn't demolish them or remove them I didn't permit that. Before I sold my house, I replaced my boiler. I permitted that.
So, okay.
Uh,
So, permit
And I mean, it's somewhere coming up, maybe it's already happened. There was a class on permits that was gonna be held something like through Greater Hartford Association of Realtors. Pay attention to those when you see those, because the permit issue is a big thing and it's confusing
What if there's like a cash buyer, they just wanna buy like $125,000 home, they don't care about the permits, they'll do it themselves,
Fine.
they're trying to like.
Great.
Okay, so.
Yeah. The cash, I mean, where permits don't necessarily need to come into play at all, assuming the cash buyer is not concerned about it. It's fine. Yeah. It really only becomes a matter if somebody's financing.
Right.
I had a house back in 2018 that I sold, like my house.
Yeah.
And I had replaced the boiler. Nobody said
Yeah.
anything about permit.
Well, that could happen.
Cause now I'm like, ooh.
Yeah. Well, I did actually, my other house at one point in time, I did replace my roof. I never took a permit out on that.
No,
I never, it's all done by a licensed contractor, whatnot, but, and that was years before I sold my house. When I sold my house, whoever the buyer's lender, the appraiser, they never
Exactly.
mentioned that.
Boiler, nobody ever said anything. So I-
John, I'm gonna hang up and join by my phone so I can hop in the car. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Sorry, I know.
Just,
I'll be right back.
Hope you get the listing.
Me too. Me too. I'm so excited. All right,
Yeah.
I'll be right back. Thanks, guys.
all right. Bye, Liz. I think she's gonna tune back in when she
Yeah.
gets in the car.
Yeah.
That's what she said.
Yep.
Yeah, so anyway, it can be such a deal killer. It's one of the 10, just gotta pay attention to it, whether we're representing a seller, representing a buyer. And, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah. I was like,
yeah,
I mean, I had a French drain put in my basement. I
you didn't do it, yeah, I know,
didn't know. I mean, you don't know what you
It's
don't
not,
know, but.
it's just not uncommon, people don't necessarily even think about it. Or, where it gets a little tricky sometimes too, is you own the house, you bought the house 5 years ago, that work was already done, nobody ever brought it up. The whole basement was refinished, right? No permit. But somehow or another, you closed on the house, you own it, now it's 5 years later and you're going to sell it, you go, well, I didn't even do the work.
Right. Yeah. I
And
mean,
so-
no clue.
some of those things, it's like town by town, how does the town treat it? Could be different. You got some towns that are brutal and some towns that are more apt to want to work with you.
Okay, Brooke Hampton.
Well, you know, and I can't tell you town by town, like West Hartford's a pretty tough town, East Hartford's a pretty tough town. But.
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
I'm just saying, I had no clue, but.
yeah,
No clue.
yep, I get it, I get it. Number 7, we'll go to buyer's remorse. We good with that, permits?
Yeah.
Okay. Buyer's remorse. So what happens, and this is primarily first-time buyers, but not entirely in a first-time buyer issue, predominantly a first-time buyer issue. They're excited about buying a house, they've never owned a house before, and you know, they sign a buyer rep agreement, we're out showing them property, and they find a property, they finally want to write an offer on it, and they write the offer on it. And maybe in this environment, there were multiple offers, but they win. Now they've got it fully executed, right? And, oh, there she is.
I'm back.
Okay,
That took a minute.
so what were you doing? You were going,
She's gonna get.
I thought you
I
were.
was, yeah, I'm going in the car now. I had to switch to my phone.
Oh, okay, all right.
So I'm gonna mute this and put my video off so I'm not a distraction.
Not a problem, kiddo. Just chime in anytime.
Thank you.
Say what?
So considerate.
So it's a good agent. Yeah, so buyer's remorse. I think it's really important for us to remember to congratulate people. It's a great thing. They've got the house. It's a wonderful, you know, blah, 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 all that. But at the same time, we need to have this little conversation about, hey, you know what, folks, just to forewarn you, there's a possibility you guys make a home later today and start getting really nervous about what you've just done, which is a great thing. But you might start getting nervous and you might start feeling even sick to your stomach. It's like you're gonna get maybe overwhelmed. I'm not saying this is gonna happen to you because it doesn't happen to everybody. It happens to some people and not others. But I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that it's a sort of a natural phenomenon and you're gonna be okay. Otherwise, you don't have that conversation. And sure enough, they're the couple that goes home and they start freaking out and you're getting a call at 11 o'clock at night and they're backing out. They're not moving forward. They're not prepared. They're not, you know, they're not ready, willing, and able. So it's a big enough phenomenon to make sure we're having the conversation. We don't have to be overly dramatic with it, but just, you know, like, again, setting expectations. Yeah, so don't avoid that one. Now, where it comes into play right now, not where it sort of moves beyond the first time buyer category, is the fact that these buyers that we have oftentimes right now, they're putting offers in that are like well in excess of the listing price, right? So it really is, are you prepared? Are you prepared to be in this environment and willing to pay the price to secure a property? Because this is the environment you're in, and for you to win, this is what we're going to be dealing with. And so we need to, as much as we can, make sure that they're able to tell us clearly that they are ready, willing, and able. And this is what happens, and this has happened. It's happened a number of times. People that win these transactions, as soon as they do, they're looking for a way out because they get totally overwhelmed by the fact that they overpaid for the property, and you know, and there's, I mean, it's sort of a natural response. I won. Well, I spent $40,000 over the list price. I wonder if I could have got it for 25 over the list price. Yeah. So if they don't try to back out immediately, they're going to look for ways based on inspections if they're having inspections.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I brought that up. I want to ask, so say that a property is $100,000 or list price, and then for the loan appraising, they say it's only 50,000 over and that's the max they could do. What happens then?
Well, if you put an appraisal rider in with your offer,
Okay.
And the appraisal rider now has been modified, so there is a section of the appraisal rider which gives the buyer the opportunity to claim how much of a appraisal gap they're willing to cover, if any. So if I'm a buyer and I really want the house and I have the means, you have to have the means.
Yeah.
And there's a $40,000 gap between the appraisal price and the sale price. And I'm gonna cover whatever the amount is, full amount of appraisal gap. Well, that's obviously the best deal possible for the seller. Some offers are being written where the buyer will cover 10,000 difference, or 5,000 or 20,000, or could be all super nuts, or none at all.
Yeah.
The none at all is if it doesn't appraise, then I put an appraisal rider in with my offer, I have the right to walk away. Where you don't need an appraisal rider is if you've got buyers who, if they can get their offer accepted, is kind of miraculous in today's world, the government type minimum down, no down payment people. Your FHA buyers, your CHFA buyers, your USDA is United States Department of Agriculture. And very much like a VA or CHFA loan, in that the buyer could borrow 100%. As long as they're qualified, and as long as the town the property is located in is a population of under 20,000 people. And we have a lot of those towns in Connecticut, right? So it's a very viable program as well. But all of those programs, they have a requirement that all parties, agents and buyers and sellers, all parties must sign what's called an amendatory clause. It's a form that the loan officer will produce after the buyer makes the formal mortgage application. And it is appraisal. So, yeah, that answer your question?
Yeah, so probably give them a heads up right from the get-go on that as well, with
Yeah.
buyers.
So, I mean, we kind of good with buyer's remorse? Yeah. Make sure you just have that little conversation. And this, by the way, this can happen with sellers too. And this has happened more in the last couple of years with sellers than I can recall ever in my history in real estate. And what is largely behind this current couple of years with sellers is they get their property on the market and maybe not enough dialogue with their agent about, well, what are they going to do when they sell this house? They're going to go where? And then that where might be, we have to find suitable housing. And we know that there's a real drag on listing inventory, available listing inventory right now, historic, absolutely historic. So we were talking about this at our market center meeting on Wednesday. Pre-pandemic, Connecticut, there was, 24,000 units available at a given time. Right now, there's 3,000. Right? You think about that, 24,000 versus 3,000. And the number of real estate agents hasn't decreased. Not yet.
August.
No, it's real. It's very real. So what's happened a lot of times, a number of times, is they get to the point where the buyer is going to buy the house, the buyer writes the offer, and the seller has nowhere to go. And there was nothing written into the agreement to accommodate the buyer and or the seller in terms of finding suitable housing. And so they didn't button it down. And then you got a seller that just refuses to go to the closing. So they sue me. It's like, I don't care, sue me. I'm not leaving my house. I have nowhere to go.
So
Yeah.
would you normally write into the agreement, like, is that the exclusive agreement to sell? Like, where would you write into the agreement?
Well,
to
a couple
rent
things.
housing?
Probably.
You probably, No, the Hubbard, the Hubbard is a buyer thing. The finding suitable housing is a seller thing. And number one, you might have it right on your listing agreement with your seller.
Okay,
Subject, the listing, it would be subject to seller finding suitable housing.
okay,
That would authorize you, when you put it into MLS, to put in the agent remarks. Sale will be subject to seller finding suitable housing.
okay,
That should trigger conversation between a buyer that's gonna be interested in putting an offer in and purchasing the property. Between the buyer's agent and the listing agent, all right, how much time are we gonna need? What, what are we looking at? I've, and if you address it in the offer, if you address it, even with an executed agreement going forward. Everybody has some boundaries that they're willing to work with.
what are your plans?
And, and if you don't do it, then it gets messy. And deals will fall apart. And we had one, it was not fairly recent. And we were on I think we were on the listing side of this one. I can't remember which side we were on. But it was subject to seller finding suitable housing, but there was no timeline put on it, no, so it was, the language was loosey-goosey. And the buyers were very, very patient. And the buyers were patient to the extent they waited over a year and the seller still hadn't found suitable housing. They finally backed out, but it was like, it wasted a year's worth of their lives. And we had another one where, and I think this one, we were on both sides, where the seller and buyer agreed to terms and suitable housing. But it's a little tricky because the seller went out and got suitable housing, but then the deal fell apart because of inspections. Then they went out and got another one, because what means finding suitable housing? At what point is it
That's
right?
my next
Is it-
question.
the fully executed agreement, or is all terms and conditions satisfied, right? In this case, these people went out 3 different times under contract, and whatever reasons blew the deal. And our buyers were like waiting, and then, okay, and they finally said, no, we're done.
So what is suitable housing? Is it different for you, like what your definition of suitable housing is compared to my definition of suitable?
Well, we
housing?
need to, basically finding suitable housing is securing a property to live in, whether it's rental or purchase.
Right, but I mean, depending on what you're looking for, does that go in? Because if I'm selling my house
Mhm.
and the listing agreement says, okay, secure suitable housing.
Yeah.
And you come up with a rental property and I'm like, no, I'm looking for another home. Does that go? I'm not looking for it. So what is suitable housing?
Well, that would, I think in terms of the agreement, all you need to write in as a condition is subject to seller finding suitable housing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then after that, it's a matter of determination as to what that is. Probably doesn't need to be addressed completely.
Can I chime in? Hi.
Yeah.
Can I chime in? I just
Yes,
want to
you
say,
may.
so I think what you're talking about is we just want to add a timeline. So the seller, yes. So if I was to sell my home, I need a place to live, after I sell it. I'm not going to be homeless. So whether that means I'm looking for a condo, a property purchase, rental, whatever, I need a deadline for the buyer. So me as the seller, I'm going to say, okay, give me like 90 days to find suitable housing. And, so as a contract standpoint, we want to make sure we have the timelines, the deadlines, and the dates, right?
So like a
Yeah.
roof and water.
However, what the point I'm just bringing about the suitable housing, it can get a little bit tricky because when you could find a house, you could find it, what does finding suitable housing mean? It means that you've bought under contract and all the terms and conditions subject to that transaction are satisfied, or I find suitable housing within that 90 days, I go under contract to purchase, but then I'm having inspections and then 10 days later, the deal falls apart because of inspection issues. Now I don't have suitable housing, right? So it can
Right, gotcha.
yeah, it can be like peeling back an onion to an extent,
Right.
as far as how do you protect the buyer and the seller?
Right.
And it's really creating win-win. It's like, can we all get on the same page and agree? I'm the seller of the property and I don't want to be limited to 90 days, 60 days. I want as much time as it's gonna take. Is your buyer willing to wait for that period of time? No, I'm not. Well, all right, let's move on.
Right.
Or I'm not gonna be that fussy. All I need is 90 days. And and by the way, if I don't find a suitable purchase, I'm gonna be willing to rent. Well, okay, now that seller is showing more flexibility, so, but it's a matter of making sure we're transparent and communicating with the parties and making sure everybody is on the same page. And that we're in writing, protecting their interest. Suitable housing, yes. All right, we good with that one?
Yep.
All right, we go to the far left column. I think we're all aware of the fact that, home inspections are in various septic inspections, well water inspections, all these inspections, lead inspections, perhaps. They're all available inspections and, sometimes buyers will choose them all. Sometimes buyers will basically waive them all and pick some and not others. But anyway, as a result of whatever inspections there are, if things come up on those inspections, those reports, and the seller or the buyer is not satisfied, the buyer wants some kind of remedy from the seller or consideration from the seller, this becomes a negotiation between the buyer and the seller through their respective agents. This kind of part of the negotiation when we represent people that we get paid money to take care of this stuff and to try to keep the big picture in mind and get people to agree to things and to do it in a reasonable and in a positive manner versus people slugging it out. Once we start raising the fists and throwing punches, usually the cooperation opportunity goes away, what are we dealing with right now in the last couple of years is we're seeing many contracts that are being accepted and inspections are being waived. That's not a healthy environment long-term. It's what we're living with right now. But we have to be, as agents, it's painful to represent a buyer and even have to have a conversation about your opportunity to win this property might very well be contingent upon you waiving your inspections. I'm not suggesting you do that because I don't think it's in your best interest, but you have to make that kind of a decision for yourself, that's hard. We want people to have inspections, that's, so it's, it's kind of mercurial world. If you're not having inspections, okay, but I have concerns from a brokerage standpoint where it could be a year or two later down the road where we have some buyer that we represented that waived inspections and then basically finds out something untoward as a result of living in the property and would have been discovered had they had inspections and they come back at us, like.
Was that going away though? Was that
What?
the talk about waiving inspections going away?
Well, it's not going away. There is an additional, other than the purchase and sale agreement where the buyer can check a box, I'm waiving inspections, right? That's one option that a buyer has. If they choose to waive inspections, there is another waiver of inspections form that lists all these various inspections that a buyer could have. I would have the buyer sign that and date it as well and put it into our internal file, which is just supporting the fact that they chose on their offer to waive inspections and they're fully identifying with us as their agent in KWLP that they chose to waive their inspections.
Oh, I thought, so I'm.
Yeah, no, you're not.
I thought within the next couple of years, the option to waive inspections was going away.
We'll see about that.
Okay.
Yeah. Probably would be a good idea if it did. Then
I thought there was some talk.
if it was regulated to that extent where you couldn't, but I don't think you could regulate to that
Like I thought, like if the home was 2 years old, or like it was a new home and people wanted to waive the inspections because it was a new home, like I thought that option was going away, but probably I misheard or something like that.
Yeah, we'll have to, pay attention to that. If you run across something,
Yeah, I
bring it to my attention.
was probably supposed to.
So so, part of what can be helpful is if we're representing buyers here and they're gonna do inspections, let's try to direct them and introduce them to people that we know are good home inspection companies, reputable, people that we're doing business with and we know out in the industry, they're good. And if you're brand new and you don't know, just, there's resource, because there are a bunch of good home inspection companies for sure. But you don't want to leave it up to your buyer to go to the yellow pages, so to speak, and pluck one out of thin air, because there are some yo-yos out there too. We call them deal killers. Throw fire on whatever it is, rather than, water. And then the other part is in the consulting, advising our buyers when we're looking at property, which is, getting to know you stuff, explaining the whole process and the fact that when they buy, they're probably, and they may very well choose to have various inspections. The idea of those inspections is to find things of a structural, plumbing, electrical, structural issues, problems. We're not looking for, and shouldn't be focused on cosmetic things unless we're looking at brand new construction. People, you can't expect to buy a new house when it's built in 1964, right? So we need to be reasonable about the way we look at this. And what is the purpose of it? So you can plant that seed and have that conversation. It doesn't mean when it comes time for the buyer to write the offer that they're gonna pay attention to you. Because you might, you might have that buyer that they have the home inspection and 40 things come up and they want all 40 things addressed by the seller. It's like, well, what are the chances of that? About zero. However, they're the buyer, they're going to authorize us on their behalf to put forth their unsatisfactory inspection notification. So we got that. Then on the seller side, making sure that we have conversations as setting expectations with our sellers, that invariably people that buy homes are going to end up choosing to have inspections, and we're going to see based on whatever inspections are performed, they're going to be getting reports, and if something seems to be askew out of line, there's a good likelihood that the buyers are going to respond and ask you to fix or replace or repair something. So, but we'll see, and that might be a time to have that conversation with the seller about anything that they really know about that is apt to come up in an inspection, maybe something they want to address before they put the home on the market, for instance. But then once you get to the actual buyers asking for X, Y, Z, and the seller's only willing to do X, but not Y and Z, well, then that's cool collection conversation, good conversation, keep it professional. And, again, always keeping in mind, our job is to try to create a win-win situation. Good, reasonable, good for the seller, reasonable, good for the buyer. Everybody can actually, if you could foresee, not that there's too many formal closings happening anymore, but the idea is to have a buyer and seller at the closing table together and they look each other in the eye and shake hands. Yeah, what a nice thing. Yeah. Any comments, Ms. Reed? Shut the phone. All right, we're good with inspections?
Yep.
So appraisals, yes. How much control do we have over appraisals? Zero, right? So buyer's gonna do financing, there's gonna be an appraisal. Actually, a buyer that could be paying cash and they could still elect to request an appraisal as part of their purchase. But for the most part, let's talk about the buyer that's gonna do financing. The bank appraiser goes out there. And I mean, you think about this environment that we're in now currently and have been for the last couple of years is, property listed at 200,000 and it sells for 280. Like And this has been a very difficult environment for the appraisers to, appraise these properties. Well, where's your comp for this? But I think by and large, the appraisal industry has done pretty well trying to keep up with all of this and the demands and the surging market and the appreciation of property values. But nonetheless, having said that, sometimes you're gonna have a discrepancies between sale price and appraisal. What are the options if that happens? So you can have, depending on the language in the agreement, the buyer could walk away. The buyer could try to negotiate something with the seller, maybe meet them somewhere in the middle. They would have to have the means to be able to do that. Or you might have a seller that has made commitments, and based on the fact that the appraisal has come in less, they're going to agree to reduce their price to the appraised value. That's an option. And the other option is if you think you've got a bad appraisal and you've got comps to support the sale price. Now you need the buyer on board with this, the seller needs to be on board with this, the agents need to be on board with this, but you can basically flag this to the lender, the loan originator, and suggest that either based on comps that we can support, and by the way, we've seen the comps that the appraiser used, and we don't necessarily agree with those. We would like to either have that appraisal modified, or we'd like to have it reissued. Harder to get that one done in today's market. If you are going to try to get the property reappraised, you got a better opportunity with the smaller community banks than if it's one of the major Bank of Americas or Wells Fargo's or any of those, because their bureaucracy, and that's it's probably not going to happen. The other part of the appraisal issue too is if there's some disagreement with an appraisal, the appraisers themselves, changing industry, they don't get paid as well as they used to. So it's kind of gotten to be somewhat of a doggy world, and they have to bid on these, and the lender can't choose their favorite appraiser anymore, because that got into Barney Frank stuff years ago at this point. But so you get the appraiser, they're not being paid that much. The last thing they want to do is have to open up a file and revisit it and then modify it and have to spend more time on it. And so there's a lot of resistance to that. It's not impossible, but it is one of those options. But aside from that option, the seller reducing their price to the appraised value, the buyer somehow finding the means to come up with the funds to reduce the gap, or eliminate the gap, because they might have cash to be able to do it. They prefer not to, because based on their loan to value, the lender is going to lend money based on the sale price or the appraised value, whichever is less. So that can affect the affordability for the buyer. But it is an issue, and sometimes it's fixable and sometimes not. But this is one of these things where you can't really set too much of expectations when you start out, because if it's gonna rear its ugly head, it's gonna be 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks after you have the fully executed agreement. Right? I mean, the only thing that is if your buyer's putting a offer price in that is well above the list price, it's like you have to have that conversation that this could be an appraisal issue, and how would we like to present this with our offer? And that's where you start having the conversation about covering appraisal gaps. Can they can't, they're willing to, they're not willing to, how much or no, we good on appraisals? I think going back to inspections for 1 minute, it's not so much going to happen in this market, but it has been effective in the past where a seller who is really a proactive kind of seller, they'll have their own home inspection before they put their house on the market. Because they want to know,
Mhm.
you know, now that doesn't necessarily apply to too many people, and it would really only apply to people that really take good care of their house. Because somebody that doesn't prioritize that is not going to agree to do their own home inspection. I mean, we did that when my parents died. They died the same year. And we, took us about a year to. My parents' house was built in 1964, and, they were very clean people, but they never threw anything away. They were products of the Depression and, anyway, we spruced it up, and as part of getting it ready for the market, we did have our own home inspection, and some things came up because the house was old. And we took care of everything on the inspection report that we thought was relevant. And we made that available when we went live on the market. We made it available to whatever buyer came along. And we didn't tell the buyer they couldn't have their own. We just said, we're willing to share this with you. And actually the buyers that came along, they were VA buyers too. And then they paid full price for the property. They never had their own home inspection. They were just satisfied with sort of, if you call it the upfrontness of it, and everything went smoothly. So it's an option for some sellers to put themselves in a real good position to ward off any inspection issues that may come up that they're unprepared for. All right, we'll go to number 3, loan approval and funding. So not the appraisal issue, but you have a buyer who makes a formal mortgage application, start the application, and come to find out along the way that they're ultimately denied the loan. And they're denied the loan could be various reasons. Sometimes it's not enough in-depth conversation between whatever lender they choose, in that sort of that pre-qualification period and pre-application period, where the lender is not asking the right questions or a complete list of questions to determine the qualifications of the buyer. Sometimes it could be the buyer just keeps things from the lender, thinking that nobody's ever going to find that out. Nobody's going to ever ask. And the reality is, when it comes to the financing part of this, every dollar and cent is totally scrutinized. So there's, the sourcing of finance is always going to be uncovered and discovered. And sometimes buyers are not quite prepared for that. And then sometimes buyers do stupid things, like they start a mortgage application, and then next thing you know, they go out and they buy a house full of furniture on credit, and it's like basic ABC of, once you start this mortgage process, the only thing you put on your credit is maybe gas or your groceries. Stay away, for I'm buying big purchase items. And then sometimes it might be with people. We've had gonna get 2 of them. People moving in, our buyers moving in from out of state, husband and wife, and they were qualified for their loan. But the wife, I think it was the wife, had a part-time job, but that income that she had was definitely used towards their qualification. But she quits the job, like a week or 2 before the closing, and somehow thinks that they're not going to find out. I don't know, but they did. Then done. I had another guy who's a single guy. He did the same thing. He quit his full-time job. It was like days before the closing. Just quit. He was obviously not concerned, but certainly the lender was. People, things can happen where. So for us, how do we manage it? Trying to make sure that our buyers are proceeding forward with lenders that we have some knowledge of whenever possible, and that we know that they're on top of their game. They pay attention to detail. And the likelihood is if that lender is going to, the loan originator is going to issue a pre-qual, then the greatest likelihood is the buyers are gonna be solid versus throwing shit at the wall. Right?
And for, how do we pre-call, like, I mean, not pre-call, but for cash buyers, do we ask for a bank statement, like?
Yes, we're going to need for, like, when we sign a buyer up to buyer rep agreement, we, as part of that, we want to have in place at that time a pre-qualification letter from a reputable lender that says they can buy. Otherwise, you don't want to sign them up to a buyer rep agreement prematurely, right? Doesn't make sense. Same with a cash buyer, it's proof of funds to close. So bank statement or bank statements or letter from their lender, from their bank, something that clearly stipulates they have the money. Yep. And on that note, we had one just a couple of years ago. And we had a buyer and we were on both sides of the transaction, and this woman was buying fairly expensive listing of ours, and our sellers were selling their house and buying a much larger property. And it turned out, and it was our boo-boo, the buyer was buying cash, seemed very reputable, had a good job and all that. But prior to the agreement being fully executed, there was no proof of funds. It's coming.
Right.
It never came. A couple of weeks went by, several weeks went by, then it was like all of a sudden, we got a fraud. And she was an absolute fraud. And people just like, why would you do that sort of thing? It's like it sort of defies rational thought. But it turned out to be, it turned out to be, pretty ugly. And our seller clients, who are now our buyer clients, were fit to be tied. We ended up getting their house back under contract a second time, but it was the listing agent, fortunately, had the means to sort of make the seller whole on what they were going to lose by the acceptance of the first offer. That never happened. So you had to be careful.
Okay, well, I'll tell you right now, I did not win Powerball.
Me either, kid. Of course, there's something about you got to play to win.
Yeah.
I probably buy one lottery ticket every 3 years.
I haven't bought one yet.
Yeah. We go to other contingencies, like the sale of the buyer's home, the Hubbard contingency, or the buyer's house under contract contingency. And those, those are, they're, as I said, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. You can do everything right and it's still not going to work, but it's the way it flies. But everybody kind of knows going into it right up front, it may or may not work. We talked a little bit before about the third party approvals, the relocation companies like Cardis, and them having their fingers in the soup, so to speak. It could be a little bit just more people to have to talk to and work through. Estate sales are typically not all that difficult, other than, the problem with estates is if you have a number of people who have equal ownership, like you've got, the parents died, you got 4 siblings, and they all have to agree, and nobody has been designated as the executor or the executrix. And therefore, you have to get agreement by everybody. That can be a little bit tricky sometimes, because the more people that have to agree on something, the more complicated it can be, because there's always somebody who's,
Yeah.
So that's the potential difficulty with estate sales. Foreclosure sales are usually really pretty straightforward. I mean, with the bank owned properties, you get a buyer that wants to buy one of these things. I mean, the likelihood is you're buying it as is. They're not going to be interested in spending time. They've never lived in the house. They don't know anything about it. They're not going to be interested in fixing things. So you want to buy it. You want to have your inspections and fine, but as long as as long as you kind of have, your buyer has that understanding when they go into the attempt of purchasing one of these, they'll be fine. The only thing with the reloads, the foreclosures, once you get the agreement with the bank, say, there's probably another 20 pages of addendums that everybody has to sign off on as part of the sale. And each bank has those same numbers of pages that everybody has to sign off on. Yeah, the short sale, they're still, as long as they've been around, they're still unpredictable. Just be, I guess, aware when you're dealing with a short sale, number one. And that can get complicated too, because every once in a while you get one, you got the buyer and you don't really know it's a short sale situation until like days before the closing. Because it's a fine line, and then you come to find out the attorneys are trying to get all the final numbers, and they realize that the seller is underwater and nobody was prepared for it. And now we're going to be going into a short sale, and that could be taking 6 months, or it could be God knows how long it might take. And is the buyer willing to wait around for that? And then that's when you don't know that there's going to be a short sale, when you start the process of purchasing and getting your executed agreement. Then there are those that they're identified as short sales, but you put your offer in with the short sale rider, and it's still, we're still dealing with a climate where it might take probably 90 days or more for the bank to even open the file to look at it. So the buyer puts an offer of 150 in on a house that's on the market for 175. And to start the process, the seller would have to sign off on the agreement, just like a normal seller. However, that seller's acknowledgement signature only takes the process next step, which is into the queue for the bank to eventually open the file when they clear off their desk and they get to it. And then you get a buyer who is waiting, thinks that they're $150,000 off, because if they get it at 150, they're just like, they're happy, they'll wait. Well, how long will you wait? You have to have that conversation, because the buyers need to know that they're going after the short sale. The chances are they're going to have to wait. And then there's no guarantee, because when the bank finally opens that file, they're going to send somebody out to evaluate that listing, and they'll come back with, yep, we'll accept your 150 offer, or we're going to counter your offer, or we're going to flatly reject your offer. And I've seen at times where they not only they'll counter the offer, but you know what? The 175 list price, we're countering you at 185, because we have determined that the value is different from list price. So there's no guarantee, and people have to wait, and they have to be patient. So short sales. And sometimes they work. Co-op agent, what do we got on the other side of the transaction? Is it somebody that's professional, somebody that knows their business, somebody that's on top of the game, somebody who's paying attention, or not? And sometimes you can have, as I say, you can have really difficult transactions, but if you got two good professional people working the difficult transaction, it'll go smoothly. Everybody's working to the common goal at the end. Versus you got the easiest transaction in the world, but you got some nincompoop on the other side of this transaction that you have to deal with. It gets tricky. And how do you deal with that? It's somehow or another, you gotta find a way to create good communication. And that might be, you swallowing your tongue, complimenting them on how wonderful they are, whatever it might be. And sometimes it means getting me involved, because I might have to get the other broker involved. We sort of bypass that part of the process, whatever it takes. And then lastly is that the deadline, inspection deadlines, closing date, deposits, occupancy, various approvals. So, and that's our job, is to make sure that we're on top of these dates, and that we're making sure that our client is fully aware and on top of the dates, because we can't rely on them doing what they need to do. We have to remind them. We should remind them. Should be part of what we do. And then sometimes you have to not only take it to your own client, but you have to go to the other side of the transaction and place those kinds of phone calls and messages to the other agent. Hey, Mary, hey, your mortgage commitment date is this Friday, and then I haven't heard from you. What's going on?
Yeah.
I mean, it happens, happens. But I can honestly say, if you can adequately cover these 10, chances are you're going to have a much greater success at keeping deals together versus not. But again, even with some of these, you can't always control it. But it's being aware of being proactive, having the right conversation, setting the expectations, knowing that if something of one of these comes up, that we've got potential solutions to offer, versus everybody panicking and totally stressing out. The say is be proactive.
Yeah.
You know, have the right conversations. Another big one on the inspections, going back to those, I mean, you got your home inspections, but you know, probably the biggest of the inspection issues is a failed septic system. You know, and you can't, generally speaking, you can't tell when you're at a property that has a septic system, whether it's functioning or not. Right? You might have a homeowner that basically has a compromised system that doesn't know. And then you have the septic inspection. I think anybody that, in my opinion, anybody that buys property that has a septic system that doesn't have some kind of indication that it's been inspected and cleaned within the last period of time, you know, recent period of time, to not have a septic inspection to me is ludicrous. Because the cost of, if it's a failed system that not only requires replacing a tank, okay, if you got a cracked tank or something, you might, you know, it's $5,500 or something, and you can replace your tank. But if it's the whole system and the leaching fields, and you have to tear everything apart and do it all over again, and everything has to be now engineered and approved by the area health district, and you could be looking at, if you're lucky, $15,000 to $20,000, and if you're not so lucky, $40,000. So it can be very costly. I was just in one of our agents in conversation just yesterday. She's got a buyer who's bidding on a property, and there are multiple offers, and one of the, I guess, the septic system has been identified as compromised. And I don't know if it needs, my sense is the system needs to be replaced. But our buyer is aware of it, and our buyer is trying to make their offer better than the other offers, and they're willing to accept it as is with the septic system. And okay, if you're aware of that and you know that you've got an issue, hopefully hopefully they have family members that own a septic company or something. I don't really, you know, but yeah, that can be a killer. And oftentimes the immediate reaction when a seller hears about this and they're not aware of it, I mean, literally they're blindsided. They're like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. It's denial to begin with. You know, they just can't believe it. But anyway, other than that, piece of cake. Piece of cake. Any questions, thoughts?
That's all.
Not now.
Yeah, go through, yeah.
Not until you're in the mix.
Probably call you 10 times a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
informative, but not tell.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully it plants seeds.
Yeah. And it's very helpful. It's, main thing is just have the conversation up front, right? That's,
As much as possible, yeah.
yeah,
Just the more of this stuff you can learn and be aware of,
Mhm.
then it just gives you, gives you that ammunition to have the conversations.
right.
Versus I don't even know what that, have a conversation about. Well, these kind of lead you to, I should have a conversation about this.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, public water and sewer, you don't have to worry about a septic system conversation,
I don't know,
for
something
instance.
thing, so,
Right.
you know, that's-
But appraisals and appraisal gaps and how much are they putting down, and what kind of financing and the permit issues and then various inspections and the lender they choose, the inspector they choose. This is where it can be we can be very impactful by keeping them on the straight and narrow.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't force people, for instance, they want to use their local bank.
Mhm.
Because that's where they do their banking and they still go into the bank and do banking. And it happens to be Bank of America, and I go, it's like, can we get a second opinion, you know?
Yeah.
It's not like Bank of America won't commit loans, but it's such a bureaucracy, and you go to the local branch, and by the time it's over, your documents have been all over the country in different departments, and things get lost, and then it's like. But there's like, unless they changed their model, TD Bank, which is a pretty big bank, and they don't even want to talk to real estate agents. They don't even want to talk to their own clients, and their whole approach is really not to be engaging. It's to keep themselves totally isolated and protected. So when you're in a transaction and they're the lender, you know, you're like,
So-
you're kind of lost. Yeah, you're like, who do I call to get information? And your buyer would be saying the same thing. I'm calling my lender, I can't even get him to call me back. And it was like, great. So. Yeah, I thought typically the mortgage broker type people are. I mean, yeah, they're gonna funnel the loans to various places and they know what they're doing and they're not working on a salary, they're commissioned people, so.
Yeah.
If it doesn't get to a closing, they're not getting paid. So they have a natural incentive to wanna do things right.
Do you have a list of local people? I mean, I saw cards out there,
Yeah,
but
see-
like, where do you,
Well, you got Brian, I think Brian McPherson is, I don't know, do you have his card?
yeah.
if it's out there,
It's
yeah.
in Glastonbury.
Yeah, he's out of Glastonbury.
Yeah.
Brian's a really good resource. I don't myself have a list, but,
Cause I thought we were supposed to give 30, but that doesn't matter.
I mean, you don't have to.
Okay.
I mean, the fact is you could give people a list of 100.
Yeah.
And if they choose one of those 100 and it goes sour and they want to sue you because you gave them bad information,
Mhm.
they'll sue you because you gave them bad information.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's the reality of it. But no, it's okay. It's certainly fine to give them name several people. You know, we've done a lot of business with Movement Mortgage and they have some of their reps and yeah, there's a lot of good people out there, so.
Okay.
But anyway, have a great weekend, kiddos.
I have two questions to ask you.
Yeah.
So potentials. There's another leasing person, client who's looking for a place, but not for him, for his brother, who's here in this area. So this guy, he lives out in California, works in Boston. And his brother has moved here. He's an international student in the University of New Haven. And he wants to look for a place for him. And he's going to be on the lease, but although he won't be staying, but he's sponsoring his brother's rent and everything else.
So,
like.
so who would actually be leasing? The brother that's not here?
Well, the tenant would be the brother who is here.
Who's here?
Yeah, yeah, but he just new, he just came in January. But his brother's going to co-sign and do everything and even be on the lease too, if it's needed.
Yeah.
Although he won't be staying there because he works out in California and he has good credit, it's got like $150,000 job, all that.
Yeah. So
how does that
co-signing is fine.
Okay,
And that can alleviate those potential concerns.
right,
You don't really have much credit, you're a student, you
yeah,
don't have any income.
yeah, because he's basically sponsoring his brother's education and stay and everything, so.
Mhm.
Okay, so when we sign a buyer, like a tenant rep, I would be doing the one in California or the tenant?
Uh,
Or both of them?
well, I know, I think at this, if. Sounds like the other brother is probably gonna have to be a co-signer.
Yeah, he has to, because I mean, this guy's new, so he has no credit, nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, so you might wanna get both their signatures.
Okay,
That would be the best business practice.
it's good to know. And second thing is, if there was a buyer who wants to buy like a condo just to get rent, something like that, was there certain things that I gotta keep in mind with condos, investment condos, like a 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom?
Well, if somebody's buying for investment, that's the loan is gonna be a little bit different. They're not gonna get the best interest rate
Right,
as
no loan needed.
versus owner occupied, pardon,
No loan needed.
so it's cash.
Yeah,
Well, cash takes a lot of the issues out of the picture. Yeah, it depends, like. What do we know about the condo? What do we know about the reserves?
HOA, the kind of
I mean,
fees, stuff like that.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the purpose of the buyer buying this as an investment is to produce income, I guess.
Yeah.
Versus looking necessarily at appreciation of value.
Yeah.
Um,
He's got 150,000 lying around, he just wants to put it somewhere, hope that it gives him something. And then probably sell it in a few years.
yeah, I think it probably. Not so much different than if it's somebody buying homeowner or owner occupied. And condition, I mean, you look at a condo, what's the condition,
Yeah.
And if you drive into it in the complex and what's the roadway look like, what's the maintenance look like,
How much?
what are the homeowners fee, are there any special assessments
Right,
in place or planned for the near future?
Yeah.
I mean, the homeowner would be responsible, because when you put your offer and you put it in with a condo rider, then triggers the necessity of the seller providing a resale package to the buyer.
okay,
Resale package is going to have two things. It's going to have all the rules and regulations of what's called the condo complex.
CNRs.
And it also, the second part is it's going to have a resale certificate as part of the resale package. The resale certificate is all the financials.
Mhm.
How is our condo that's being purchased all up to speed?
Okay.
Are they paying their fees? And then what is the situation with the complex itself? Are they properly insured? And this has just come up, which I'll share with you. But yeah, special assessments assured, the reserves, do they have reserves? You go and you drive around and you look and it's like, man, this place looks like it needs a lot of maintenance. And then you go and then you look at the resale package and you look at the resale certificate. And you go, then you got no reserves, which means it's anything they're gonna do is gonna require special assessments, right?
Yeah, okay.
And some of the condo complexes over the course of time. They've always got special assessments going on. It'll be a 3-year assessment to replace siding, but that's only. Gonna be for the siding, because as soon as that one's over, there's gonna be another special assessment to tree maintenance or,
Right.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that those properties won't sell. It's just that it's a reality when you buy into them.
Yeah.
Knowing kind of what the circumstances.
Right.
The thing with insurance now, with some of the condos is insurance rates have gone sky high. And for those condos that don't have great reserves.
Yeah.
What they're doing is they're getting insurance on the complex, but they're underinsured. As far as the lender's concerned.
Okay.
And so you can't get financing.
Right.
And so if you're a cash buyer and you're looking to buy one condo in that kind of circumstance, you need to be aware of it.
Yeah.
And because this came up yesterday, because we're representing a seller, I think the condo's in Rocky Hill, and it's exactly that. We get buyer and the buyer couldn't get financing because of the insurance issue.
Yeah.
And so the seller is actually looking for a cash buyer, but the reality is we know what the insurance issue is. Do we, as a listing brokerage, have responsibility to disclose that to any potential buyer?
Right.
Cash or not? And I maintain we do, because I don't want the potential liability of somebody.
Yeah.
Not being aware of that, and it's, in my opinion, a very disclosable issue at this point in time.
Yeah. I saw one of those actually in Waterbury. There's this one condo, it literally says on the listing that cannot be financed. Current owner owns 4 of the units or something like that, so, yeah.
Yeah.
It's $120,000 though, but.
But at least, it's full disclosure, so
Yeah.
you don't have to be guessing.
Yeah.
And it's a little tricky for us with this Rocky Hill condo, because our seller is kind of doesn't wanna have to take responsibility for disclosing,
Right.
just,
Yeah, do you know how much that listing is at?
170s or something.
Tips for successful showing. Showing someone else's property, perhaps.
You just taking a buyer to show them? Well, I would just be friendly.
Because I heard you have to like take out the trash, you have to scrub the toilets, like, is any of that, no?
What, to show a property?
You're representing the buyer? Or,
No, I'm
Oh,
showing
so-
the property to
so
the
if
buyer,
it's your listing and,
yeah, it's Howell's listing
Howell's listing,
right, okay.
and you're showing it to
for her. to
Somebody's
her
coming
buyer.
in,
a buyer that's unrepresented, or a buyer that through another agent, or,
To another agent,
no, there's nothing.
oh, okay. Yep, that's
I mean,
what
if you get
was
there, early and you notice that, something's out of place or something.
like, okay.
You know.
Alright, again, cause you hear.
Yeah.
All these things, and I was like, oh,
Wait,
okay,
for-
wait, what do I have to do? You know what I mean? Like, should I come in with my,
Yeah,
I'm picturing
bring your
Carol
pleading-
Burnett.
right, bring it-
with
right,
Michael, you know what I mean, like.
No, I mean, do we as agents sometimes do those sorts of things? Yes.
Okay,
That's, that's not the expectation.
alright.
Yeah.
Like, put the dishes away,
Yeah,
clean
right,
it,
right,
like,
right.
I was like, oh, okay,
Well,
alright.
I didn't flush the toilet.
Like, yeah, okay, tell me that.
I mean, I would just keep the toilet to shut it.
Yeah, but I didn't know, but I didn't know, like, wait, what am I, because it's my first one and it's for
Yeah.
somebody else, so I
Yeah.
didn't wanna,
No,
and especially her, I don't want her calling, wait, what did?
Well,
Yeah,
Yeah,
wait, what are you doing? What didn't you do?
no, I did one for her, she'd be nice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
no, it'll be all right.
Okay,
Just have to make sure you can get access, what, is it a combo lockbox on the door, or is it a?
yeah, she's gonna let me know, but
Yeah.
other than that, I figured since I'm here, let me ask.
Cause that can be the ultimate embarrassment, but you go out to a property to show it and
That happened to me.
there's say, number one, electronic box on it, and you don't have your electronic key. Or there's a combo and you don't know what the combo is, and you can't get a hold of anybody at the office.
Electronic key.
It's you could download the app, it's super easy.
Yeah, but I don't think Rihanna. Okay,
You would have gotten that information from,
Did you get the logins email yet? like it says
Mhm.
login, yeah, it's part of that. It'll be there and there.
Yeah, go look at that email.
No,
And
but I
if you
don't
got
think.
that, it would have been in one of, so she does that before you get the logins email, so
Right,
just
but-
check in. Would have got an email from probably Supra or something like that. SUPRA.
Yeah, it says UPRA.
Yeah, I tried the E key once 2 days ago and it said access denied and it makes this horrible noise. And I'm like, okay, but then thankfully I knew that they had a manual lockbox too, I knew the code to that. So I just did that and got it.
So do you know why it was denied?
I don't know, like, I tried doing the thing, pushing it up and stuff, but it just kept saying denied, so. I don't know if it was my problem or the listing agent's problem, I don't know, but.
Huh.
Yeah, there was a secondary, keyed in thing, so.
Well, have you successfully used the E key?
No, that was my first time using it, that's why I wanted to try, there was like a manual thing, but just before the client came in, I was like, let me just try this first. It's like, thank God I didn't use it when they were here.
Well, you better probably,
Cause I did the update and everything, so I
Uh-huh.
followed all the steps, I saw the tutorials and all that,
okay,
but for some reason it says opening up, but then it says access denied. At the end of it, so
I mean, you paid whatever you owed
it will pay what?
to the E key.
Yeah, I mean, I have the app, it's all working,
Okay.
I have the pin and everything,
All right.
yeah.
I don't know.
I'll
I don't know.
have to figure that out.
Yeah, you'll definitely need the E keys. Cause when you're out there showing properties, Rachel, it's about 50-50 is whether they're gonna be, electronic or combo.
Okay.
Now, talking about that, that could have been the issue, there's no cell reception in that area. Maybe
Possible.
that was it,
And that is a glitch with the
Yeah.
E key system.
maybe that was it.
And that could be it.
Yeah.
That's very possible.
So they give you the PIN code to the key and you put that code in?
So no, so
Yeah.
you would have to make a pin and then you go near the thing, it's a Bluetooth thing, so that
Yeah.
has a Bluetooth disconnected with your phone's Bluetooth, just tap it or whatever, and then it should open up.
Oh.
Alright,
Okay. We'll figure it out.
Figure it out, Rachel.
I know,
Yeah.
all this learning, turning my brain.
I don't have any